What's up guys, in this video we're going to see if we can get this tractor running as good as new. This is the second video for this tractor. If you want to, you can go check out the first video where we kind of put in like the ignition components and stuff like that. This is an International 184. I'm going to take you guys around and kind of show you per request. So obviously, first of all, the hood doesn't sit as far forward as it is now. I just have it like slid forward so I can work on stuff. But this is an International 184 and this was brought to me with some issues as far as starting goes, and they said there was possibly some electrical issues, and then when it would start it would idle very rough. It's a pretty sweet little tractor. I think these were made for like only 4 years or something, late 70s into maybe like 1980. But in the last video we put a new ignition coil on here. We also put new points, cap, rotors, wires, plugs, everything. So then I get everything slapped together. It still wants to run rough, which I diagnosed it to a fuel issue, which fuel was leaking out of the throat of the carburetor, and it was just kind of like dripping onto the floor. All right, so it's been replaced with a non-factory carburetor. It actually ran really great whenever I first started it. And then we had another issue where all of a sudden we couldn't start the thing again. All right, so I come up here and let me take my temporary steering wheel off. Okay, there we go. That's what I was using to steer the thing while the steering wheel's off. But took the panel out, again, just to show you real quick what it's doing. So make sure we're in neutral. We are. And lights come on the dash, but whenever you turn it, there's nothing. So I pulled this panel off, and again, we have power to the dash. Still nothing. So in here is our starter solenoid. So I'm going to show you guys how you check that real quick. All right, so I've got a light here. I'm going to hopefully show you guys as best as I can. But again, there's your starter solenoid, and basically whenever you turn the key in the ignition, it sends a signal to the solenoid, and it's supposed to send power to the battery cable that runs down to the starter. However, it's not doing that. So one way that you can kind of test to see if this is your problem is to go post to post here, and you obviously don't want to be touching the metal. Use a plastic screwdriver and hold the plastic in, and you just kind of cross from the first terminal to the other terminal. That pretty much just bypasses the starter solenoid completely. So if you can do this, and so as you can hear, it wants to run, but we just have to replace that starter solenoid. So as you can hear, it's trying to run pretty well. So first of all, we know we need to replace the starter solenoid, as well as possibly doing some stuff with the fuel, because when I jumped the starter solenoid in the first place, kind of let it idle for a little while, and then it would die, and it was because there was a lack of fuel going down there. So usually that's like a sediment bowl issue. So at the bottom of the fuel tank there's a little sediment bowl with a screen on top of it, and sometimes that can get plugged up with just a bunch of stuff that's going through the gas tank. So if that's the case and it's just delivering slower fuel, then that makes sense why it want to run on whatever's in the fuel line. And then once it runs on everything that's inside the fuel line, it just kind of dies. A little side note, another thing that it could potentially be is there's a filter right here, and you can see through it, and it looks like that's kind of where it's struggling at. It's a new filter, you can see that, but to me it looks like it may be upside down. So usually there's a little indicator, an arrow that goes with what direction the fuel flow is. And if it's reversed, it could potentially restrict the amount of fuel flowing through there. So that could be another culprit. So we'll probably try first just checking that filter, and then if we can just flip it and see if that fixes it. All right, so first we're gonna get started with the starter solenoid. The exact solenoid that I was looking for is not available. So instead I just bought a typical 12-volt starter solenoid. Okay, so again, our parts list is just kind of this typical 12-volt starter, and you'll get a closer look at this whenever we're going through with the installation. And I also got some gasket material just in case it was the sediment bowl. You can clean that little screen as best as you can, and then I always just make a new gasket out of this gasket material. So as you can see, this is much different than the one that we have down in there. And again, I'll give you a better look whenever we get this one removed. Very first step, you want to disconnect the battery. I'm not gonna start touching anything yet, so I'll do that off camera here in a second. But basically, to test these and figure out which one's what, you can either follow it with just your sight, you know, grabbing a wire and kind of shaking it and seeing where it goes, or you can actually use a tester and just test it. All right, so one of these posts out here typically is a 12 volt constant feed. And then there's a trigger wire. And again, I'm not talking specific post here. It depends on what kind of solenoid you ordered. But one post will be 12 volt constant. The other post here will be 12 volts to the starter. Once this trigger wire sends the proper signal to operate this little mechanism thing and send the signal out here. So again, it doesn't really matter what kind of solenoid you use. It's the same kind of concept. We couldn't find a replacement one, so we're just going to use one of these. It's just your typical Ford style starter solenoid. All right guys, so I've gotten the starter solenoid put in and I'll show you down in there. It actually bolted right into where the studs were for this one, so that was nice. So on that solenoid there's an S terminal, which is for start, and on my Ford truck I went and looked, it's the terminal that you're supposed to hook the starter signal to. Also, I went and looked on this side and I pulled this fuel line off, and sure enough the fuel filter was on backwards, so it was showing the flow going up, and obviously this is from the tank down. Gravity feeds the fuel down, so obviously that arrow has to be in line with the flow of fuel, and we have it hooked up to our carburetor. So I am 100% positive, let's say 99.999% positive, that when I get this thing back together and try to fire it right now, it's going to start. All right, so I had to go to the store real quick to get some new terminals for the battery. I just feel like the old ones aren't, well, one, they're really dirty and corroded, and second of all, they're just not really like clamping down like they're supposed to. So we're going to go ahead and replace these. So in our next time lapse, you're gonna see this get replaced. It's pretty straightforward. You just unbolt this. It's got a little clamp thing on there that actually bolts down, so it's really easy. And then we're also going to be taking the sediment bowl out and cleaning it as well. So I'll show you what we're gonna be going for. All right, so I hope you guys can see that, but on the bottom of this sediment bowl right here, and as you can see, again, it's really dirty, but on the bottom of that sediment bowl, there's a little threaded part that's like a clamp to hold that sediment or that glass bowl against this little fitting up here. So we're going to just unscrew that, pull the clamp up, and then the bowl will come straight down. So you're gonna see all that stuff on a time lapse. Okay guys, so everything is back together. I went ahead and got everything knocked out and got the tractor all put back together. I pulled the sediment bowl out and I ended up making a new gasket out of this like rubberized cork stuff here. I just laid the gasket down, just like that, traced around the bowl, and then I just kind of measured how far inward I'd have to cut, because obviously I had to go in there and make my circular cut and then go in there and make a second circular cut to get myself a ring. And that was what I used for the new gasket for the bowl. So I checked, I turned the fuel all the way on, no fuel's leaking out or anything like that. I just kind of have everything loosely tightened down. That way we can go through here and do some testing. And then if we have the same issue where after a little bit of idling, the tractor still wants to die, then we'll go and try to diagnose and fix it. However, I'm fairly certain this is gonna be just fine. So I'm gonna go open my doors. All right, so we're gonna try to do this here. We have the tractor turned to like a medium idle speed, and we're just gonna see what happens here. So make sure we are not in gear, and we'll see what happens. Oh yeah. Okay. See if we can move here. That's reverse. That's forward. All right, we're gonna get this thing outside and see if it'll idle for a little while. right, it's been sitting outside for a little while now, and seems like it's idling perfectly fine. Again, we're gonna let it sit and see what it does. There's some vibrations, that little chattering you're hearing. That is like from maybe the access panel kind of rattling against the frame of it, but sounds like it's idling really good though. Nice and smooth. Okay, so I took this around the backyard and everything seems to be working perfectly fine. It starts up so good. I mean, you just barely have to flip the key. I'll go ahead and show you again. It runs perfectly. So, and again, that little rattling, that's like the body panel over here or something is like kind of slapping against the side of this somehow. So like something's making contact there. But if you guys are having similar issues with your tractor, and it really kind of applies to all the older tractors, you can kind of like look and test the same things that we've tested here. You know, one of the most common things that if you can't really figure out what's going on and it's like some weird wiring thing where things are kind of like intermittently working, I think the best rule of thumb is like always check for grounds, because that's the one thing that people just kind of forget about. And then of course we put the new battery terminals on, and that eliminated all the weird wiring issues. So the fix for the starter obviously was just switching that solenoid that allowed the starter to engage whenever you turn the key. Let me know your thoughts on this kind of content, because obviously this is a customer's thing and I normally post videos of my own stuff. So I do have a customer's car that's going to be coming that I think will be a really cool project for this channel. So I'm excited about that one. If you haven't already, I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you turn on the bell and all that stuff so you get all the notifications whenever videos uploaded. Other than that, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.